Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Trends channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The receptionist, a new hire who did not recognize the storm brewing in Kane's eyes, offered a polite greeting which he ignored, his focus singular, his destination clear as he strode purposefully down the corridor towards the double oak doors of Jill's office. Inside, Jill turned from the window, a faint, weary smile touching her lips as the doors opened. "Kane," she said, her voice a blend of surprise and caution. She had not been expecting him, and his presence here, in her inner sanctum, felt immediately intrusive, a violation of the unspoken boundaries that had been erected since his split from Lily. "This is a surprise. What can I do for you?" She gestured for him to take a seat, her own business instincts kicking in, preparing for a negotiation. Perhaps a plea for help or a discussion about the children. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the unnatural gleam in his eyes, but she chalked it up to the general stress he was under. She had, after all, seen Kane at his lowest before, and she, perhaps foolishly, believed she understood the limits of his temperament. Kane did not sit. He remained standing, his hands clenched at his sides, his gaze sweeping over the opulent room, the original artwork, the antique desk that had once been Catherine's, the very symbols of a legacy he had desperately wanted to claim as his own. "You can listen, Jill," he began, his voice low and tight, each word measured and dripping with a venom that made the air in the room grow cold. "For once you can just stop talking, stop judging, stop pulling the strings from up here in your ivory tower, and just listen to what you and your family have done." The conversation, if it could be called that, escalated with a terrifying swiftness. What started as a litany of grievances, Lily's coldness, Billy's smug superiority, his alienation from his children, quickly spiraled into a torrent of incoherent rage. Kane's points, once perhaps grounded in a kernel of legitimate hurt, became untethered from reality, looping back on themselves in a paranoid narrative where Jill was the master puppeteer of his misery. He accused her of poisoning Lily against him, of financing legal battles to keep him from his sons, of whispering in boardroom ears to ensure he would never find respectable work in this town again. Jill, initially attempting a tone of reason, of trying to de-escalate, found her own temper fraying. "That's enough, Kane," she stated, her voice gaining the steely authority that had cowed corporate raiders. "I will not stand here and be accused of some grand conspiracy against you. You made your choices. You lied, you cheated, you betrayed my daughter's trust. The consequences you are facing are of your own making." The word consequences seemed to act as a trigger. It was as if a final, vital thread of Kane's self-control had snapped. A guttural roar erupted from him, a sound so raw and inhuman it froze the blood in Jill's veins. His eyes, once pleading, were now wild, vacant pools of pure fury. He lunged forward, not at her directly, but towards the heavy, bronze statue of a falcon in flight that served as a bookend on her shelf. A gift from John Abbott long ago, a symbol of his belief in her soaring potential. Time seemed to warp, slowing to a nightmarish crawl. Jill saw the intention in his movement, saw his hand close around the cold, hard metal of the statue, and her mind, sharp as ever, processed the threat with horrifying clarity. There was no time to reach the panic button under her desk, no time to call for help. Her body reacted before her mind could fully command it, a surge of adrenaline-fueled instinct born from a lifetime of fighting. As Kane turned, the statue raised high above his head, his face a grotesque mask of unseeing rage. She sidestepped and brought her arms up in a defensive cross. The impact was not a clean strike, but a brutal, glancing blow that deflected off her forearms and crashed into her shoulder with a sickening, dull thud. The force of it was immense, sending a lightning bolt of white-hot agony through her entire body. She cried out, a short, sharp sound of shock and pain, as she was thrown off balance, stumbling backwards against her desk, sending a crystal pen set, and a stack of important documents scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. The pain was blinding, a nauseating wave that threatened to pull her under, but a deeper, more primal instinct for survival kept her upright, her wide, terrified eyes locked on Kane, who stood heaving, the statue still clutched in his hand, seemingly stunned by his own actions, by the physical manifestation of the violence that had been simmering inside him for so long. The initial shock of the blow created a bizarre, suspended moment of silence in the room, broken only by the ragged sound of their breathing. Kane looked from the statue in his hand to Jill, who was clutching her injured shoulder, her face ashen, a trickle of blood already beginning to seep from a cut on her arm where the statue had made contact. The reality of what he had just done seemed to break through the red haze of his anger for a split second, and in his eyes, Jill saw a flicker of the man she once knew, a flicker of horror, of recognition. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a defensive, defiant fury. "You see," he spat, his voice trembling, though whether from rage or fear, it was impossible to tell. "You see what you make me do? You push and you push until there's no other choice." He took a step towards her, and Jill, despite the searing pain, pushed herself upright, her back against the solid wood of her desk. "Get out, Kane," she managed to gasp, her voice strained but firm. "Get out of my office before this gets any worse." But the plea fell on deaf ears. The dam had broken, and the torrent of his pent-up emotion was not so easily contained. He began to advance again, not with the clear intent to strike once more, but with a menacing, unpredictable energy, circling her, the statue now held like a club at his side, his words a continuous, low stream of accusations and threats, trapping her in the corner between her desk and the window, a predator cornering his prey. It was at this precise moment of heightened, terrifying tension that the universe, with its own cruel sense of timing, intervened. The office doors, which Kane had not fully closed in his agitated state, were pushed open by a young, eager-faced junior executive named Chloe Mitchell, who was carrying a folder of urgent reports that needed Jill's signature before the weekend was out. "Ms. Abbott, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but these need..." Her cheerful, rehearsed sentence died in her throat as she took in the scene before her. The disarray of the room, Jill's pale, pained expression as she clutched her shoulder, the blood on her sleeve, and Kane Ashby, wild-eyed and holding a heavy bronze statue, standing over her in a clearly aggressive posture. For a moment, all three were frozen in a macabre tableau. Chloe's brain, trained for corporate crises but not for physical ones, struggled to process the information. Kane's head snapped towards her, his expression shifting from rage to panic. The witness had arrived. The secret was out. With a strangled curse, he dropped the statue. It hit the Persian rug with a heavy, muffled thud, leaving a dent in the intricate pattern. He didn't say another word. He simply shoved past the stunned Chloe, who stumbled back into the hallway, and broke into a run, disappearing towards the emergency stairwell, the sound of his frantic footsteps echoing like a frantic, fading heartbeat. The spell was broken. Chloe rushed to Jill's side, her own hands trembling. "Oh my God, Jill. Are you okay? What happened? Should I call an ambulance? Security?" The questions tumbled out in a frantic stream. Jill, leaning heavily on the desk, waved a dismissive hand, though the gesture was weak. The adrenaline was beginning to recede, leaving in its wake the full, throbbing agony of her injury and a deep, chilling cold that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. No ambulance," she breathed, her mind already racing ahead of the pain. The scandal. The headlines. The effect on the company, on the family, on Billy and Lily. "Just help me sit down. And call my son. Call Billy." She needed family. She needed the one person whose loyalty, however complicated, was never in doubt. As Chloe helped her into her leather chair, her movements gentle and careful, Jill's gaze fell upon the fallen statue, lying on its side like a slain bird. It was more than just a weapon. It was a violation. He hadn't just attacked her body. He had attacked her history, her sanctuary, the very memory of John and the life she had built from nothing. The physical pain was one thing, but this sense of violation, of a sacred trust being shattered, cut far deeper. She closed her eyes, trying to steady her breathing, but all she could see was the wild, unrecognizable face of the man she had once called son-in-law, and the chilling knowledge that the world she had built for herself was far more fragile than she had ever allowed herself to believe. The aftermath of the attack unfolded with the slow, inexorable gravity of a tragedy, its repercussions rippling out from the epicenter of Jill's office to touch every corner of Genoa City. Billy Abbott, upon receiving the frantic call from Chloe, had dropped everything, his own complicated history with Kane momentarily eclipsed by a fierce, protective fury towards his mother. He arrived at Chancellor Industries to find Jill being attended to by a private physician he had summoned, a man discreet and loyal, who confirmed a severe contusion and a likely hairline fracture in her shoulder, but no life-threatening injuries. The relief Billy felt was immediately tempered by the cold, hard look in his mother's eyes. This was not the vulnerable, frightened woman he had expected to find. This was Jill Foster Abbott, the warrior, her pain already being forged into a steely resolve for retribution. "I want him found, Billy," she said, her voice quiet but laced with an iron will. "I want him arrested. I will not sweep this under the rug. He crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed." Meanwhile, across town the news began to trickle out, first through the corporate gossip chain, then through a carefully worded press release from Chancellor Industries that spoke of an incident involving a former associate, deliberately vague to avoid a stock panic but specific enough to set the rumor mill into overdrive. Lily Winters Ashby was in her own office at Chancellor Winters, reviewing merger documents, when her assistant hesitantly entered with the news. The color drained from Lily's face. The father of her children, the man she had loved for so many years, had physically assaulted her mother. The information was so grotesque, so fundamentally opposed to the man she thought she knew, that her mind initially rejected it. But as the details emerged, the statue, the cornering, the blood, a cold dread settled in the pit of her stomach, followed by a profound and weary sadness. This was the final, ugly act in the long, painful dissolution of their marriage, a line of violence that retroactively colored every argument, every betrayal, with a new and terrifying hue. The hunt for Kane began in earnest. The Genoa City Police Department, prompted by a formal statement from Jill and a witness account from Chloe, issued a warrant for his arrest on charges of assault and battery. He had, it seemed, vanished into thin air. His apartment was empty, his credit cards were unused, and his phone went straight to voicemail. He was a ghost, a man who knew the city well enough to disappear, but who also knew that in a town as small and interconnected as Genoa City, true disappearance was an impossibility. It was only a matter of time. The emotional fallout, however, was immediate and devastating. The Abbott family gathered at the ranch, a united front of outrage and concern. Jack Abbott, the patriarch, felt a familiar weight of responsibility, a nagging guilt that somehow the family's collective history with Kane had contributed to this moment. He stood with Billy, the two brothers, often at odds, united in their protective fury towards their mother. "We'll find him, Jill," Jack promised over the phone, his voice steady and reassuring. "He won't get away with this." But for Lily, the situation was a torturous conflict. While she was horrified by Kane's actions and fiercely protective of her mother, she also had to contend with the reality that her sons, Charlie and Matt, were now facing the public shame of their father being a wanted man, a violent criminal. How does one explain to a child that their father, their hero, is capable of such a thing? Her heart was a battlefield of conflicting loyalties, to her mother, to her children, and to the faint, fading echo of the love she once held for Kane. The search stretched through the weekend, a tense, anxious period where every phone ring and every knock on the door sent a jolt through the collective nervous system of the Abbott and Chancellor clans. It was Devin Hamilton, with his vast resources and his own complicated, brotherly history with Kane, who finally got a break. An alert from a private security firm he retained flagged a transaction from a prepaid debit card at a seedy motel on the outskirts of the city, a place that rented rooms by the hour and asked no questions. Devin, feeling a responsibility to intervene before the situation escalated further, decided to go himself, not with the police but alone. He found Kane in a dim, musty room, sitting on the edge of a stained bed, looking hollowed out and broken. The rage was gone, replaced by a profound, bottomless despair. He didn't resist when Devin entered. He simply looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and empty. "I didn't mean. I just lost control, Devin," he whispered, his voice ragged. "I looked at her, and I just saw everything I'd lost, everything I'd never have." Devin, his own anger tempered by pity for the shattered man before him, spoke calmly, rationally. He talked about surrender, about facing the consequences, about not making this any worse for his children. It was a long, difficult conversation, but eventually, the fight drained completely out of Kane. He nodded, a slow, defeated gesture. He would turn himself in. As Devon made the call to Billy to inform him of the development, he looked at Kane, a man who had once been his brother, now a cautionary tale of how far a person can fall when they allow their pain to curdle into poison. The arrest, when it came, was a quiet, anticlimactic affair. Kane offered no resistance as the officers cuffed him and led him to a waiting squad car. His head bowed, the picture of utter defeat. The physical threat was neutralized, but the emotional and psychological damage he had inflicted was only just beginning to reveal its true depth. In the days that followed, Genoa City began the slow, painful process of absorbing the shock of the attack. The story was the lead item on every local news broadcast, and the front page of the Genoa City Chronicle, complete with photos of a stoic Jill being helped into her car by Billy, and a grainy surveillance image of a handcuffed Kane being led into the police station. The public spectacle was a fresh humiliation for the family, a private trauma served up as public entertainment. For Jill, the physical pain was manageable with medication, but the psychological wounds were slower to heal. She found herself startling at sudden noises, feeling a sense of unease in her own office, a space that had always been her fortress. She had the statue removed, unable to even look at it. The violation of her safety, the shattering of the illusion of invulnerability that came with power and age, was a heavy burden. She put on a brave face for the public, for the board of directors, but in the quiet moments with Billy, the mask would slip, and the vulnerable, wounded woman beneath would surface. Billy, for his part, was wrestling with his own demons. His history with Kane was long and fraught with competition, betrayal, and a strange, twisted camaraderie. He had hated Kane at times, pitted him at others, but he had never imagined him capable of this. The attack on his mother ignited a primal rage in Billy, a desire for vengeance that scared him with its intensity. He sat with Lily, the two of them bound by this shared catastrophe, and they talked for hours, trying to make sense of the senseless, to find a path forward for their family through the wreckage. The legal proceedings began, a slow-moving machine of depositions, arraignments, and plea negotiations. Kane, from his jail cell, was initially despondent, but as the reality of his situation set in, a flicker of his old survival instincts emerged. He secured a sharp, ambitious defense attorney who immediately began crafting a narrative. A narrative of temporary insanity, of profound emotional distress, of a man pushed to the brink by the powerful forces arrayed against him. It was a strategy that sought to mitigate his actions, to frame the attack not as a premeditated assault, but as the tragic, uncontrollable outburst of a man broken by the system. This legal strategy infuriated the Abbott family, who saw it as a further insult, a refusal to take full responsibility for his monstrous actions. Jill, however, was prepared. She was a veteran of countless battles, both in the boardroom and the courtroom, and she would not be a victim in this process. She met with the district attorney, her testimony clear, precise, and devastating. She described the fear, the pain, the absolute certainty in that moment that Kane intended to do her serious harm. She was a formidable witness, her dignity and her clarity making Kane's defense seem shabby and exploitative by comparison. The case was becoming more than just a simple assault. It was becoming a referendum on power, family, and the limits of forgiveness. As the week of October 4th drew to a close, the immediate crisis had passed, but a new, more complicated phase was beginning. Kane was behind bars, awaiting trial, his future a bleak landscape of orange jumpsuits and concrete walls. Jill was physically on the mend, but emotionally scarred, her trust in her own judgment shaken. The Abbott and Chancellor families were left to pick up the pieces, their relationships forever altered by the violence that had erupted in their midst. Lily faced the daunting task of guiding her sons through the trauma of their father's very public downfall, all while navigating her own complicated grief and anger. Billy grappled with the need for justice versus the corrosive nature of his own hatred. And throughout Genoa City, in the mansions and the corporate towers, in the coffee shops and the society pages, the story was told and retold. A modern-day Greek tragedy about how the past never truly stays buried, how love can curdle into obsession, and how the most dangerous attacks often come not from strangers, but from those who were once welcomed into the inner sanctum of a family's heart. The dust had settled on the physical altercation, but the emotional and psychological shockwaves would continue to reverberate for weeks and months to come, a permanent fissure in the foundation of their lives, A stark reminder that on the seemingly tranquil surface of their world, the waters were always restless. The week ahead on The Young and the Restless promises to be one of those unforgettable stretches of storytelling where family bonds are tested, betrayals rise to the surface, and shocking twists leave everyone in Genoa City reeling. Saturday's full episode for October 4th, 2025, is already making waves among fans because it centers on one of the most dramatic and emotional conflicts that the show has teased for months. Kane's furious confrontation with Jill, and the startling moment when his pent-up anger turns into an unexpected attack. For longtime viewers, the tangled history between Kane Ashby and Jill Abbott is full of complicated family ties, secrets, and painful revelations, so it is no surprise that the writers are now pulling the trigger on a storyline that takes all of that buried tension and brings it crashing to the surface in explosive fashion. The Saturday installment not only delivers on the promise of drama, but also sets the tone for the week ahead, reminding fans why the soap remains one of television's most enduring guilty pleasures. From the opening moments, there is a simmering unease that blankets the Abbott mansion, where Jill has been trying to put the pieces of her fractured family back together. Recent revelations have already shaken her sense of identity, and she is grappling with how her decisions in the past continue to affect the people she loves most. Kane, on the other hand, has been spiraling in his own private turmoil, haunted by lies that have unraveled and a sense of betrayal that has left him unable to find peace. His world has been turned upside down by the discovery that Jill, the woman he once saw as a mother figure, may not be who she claimed to be in his life. The DNA results that recently surfaced have torn away a fragile layer of trust, and Kane, struggling with anger and confusion, enters the episode like a man on a mission, determined to confront Jill in the most direct way possible. The emotional intensity of their confrontation grows scene by scene. Jill attempts to keep her composure, reminding Kane that family isn't always about bloodlines, that love and loyalty can define relationships just as much as biology. But Kane is in no mood for speeches. The sense of betrayal he feels is raw, visceral, and overwhelming. Every time Jill tries to explain, he cuts her off, his voice filled with a sharpness that pierces through her defenses. Viewers can feel the decades of hurt boiling up inside him, a storm of resentment and rejection that no calm words can soothe. The writing leans heavily into the idea that this isn't just about one secret or one lie, but rather the accumulation of every moment where Kane has felt excluded, manipulated, or deceived by the people he thought he could trust most. When the argument turns physical, the room itself seems to shrink, pulling the audience into the claustrophobic moment where Kane's control finally snaps. He lashes out, his anger spilling into action as he pushes past Jill's pleas. The attack, shocking as it is, doesn't come across as premeditated violence, but as the desperate, anguished response of a man who has been pushed beyond his breaking point. Jill, taken aback, fights to steady herself, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and heartbreak. For viewers who have followed her journey for decades, this is one of those moments where the character's vulnerability is laid bare, reminding us that beneath Jill's formidable exterior is a woman who has always battled for respect, family, and love in a world that constantly tests her resilience. What makes this particular episode stand out is how it doesn't sensationalize the conflict, but instead roots it in deep emotional realism. The writers allow both characters to express their perspectives, ensuring that Kane's anguish is understood while Jill's pain is equally palpable. The cinematography lingers on their faces, capturing the trembling lip, the narrowing eyes, the silent seconds where words fail, and emotions take over. In those silences, the audience is left to fill in the weight of history, to remember the betrayals, reconciliations, and countless battles that have defined their relationship. It's storytelling at its most powerful, because it trusts the viewers to carry that emotional baggage into the scene and feel the full gravity of the moment. The fallout of this attack is poised to ripple far beyond the Abbott family. In Genoa City, no secret stays buried for long, and no act of violence goes without consequence. Already, whispers are beginning to circulate among the other residents. Will Billy, still grappling with his own family revelations, step in to defend Jill? How will Lily, who has always been caught between loyalty to Kane and her own moral compass, respond when she learns of his actions? And what about the ever-watchful Victor Newman, who thrives on opportunities to exploit the weaknesses of his rivals. The Saturday episode doesn't answer all these questions, but it certainly plants the seeds for a week filled with betrayals, shifting alliances, and explosive confrontations.